Second part. Not long after they got on a path winding through trees where white threads rested like cotton, Wesley asked, "You been to this island before?" "Not once," Meg replied with a resolute shake of her head. By nature, she liked to be perfectly clear about everything. "Then I guess there's no point in asking what this forest's like, eh?" "Of course not," Meg managed to respond, though she sounded distracted. They were in territory controlled by the nobility, in a forest where tree trunks stood anywhere from 30 to 60 feet high, and there was no telling what lurked there. Everyone knew the nobility had created organisms with little regard for whether or not they were deadly, and then scattered them around the world. Man-eating eagles with 60-foot wingspans soared the skies. Enormous reptiles that might be mistaken for mountains walked the earth, and giant octopi reached from the sea with tentacles that seemed to threaten the very stars above the horizon. In the eastern frontier, where enormous reptiles were particularly abundant, their tremendous mass caused the ground to settle nearly an inch every year, and that combined with the tsunamis summoned by sea sprites to cause widespread damage on a regular basis. An average-looking stand of trees might suddenly bear fangs, and vines could reach out and snatch up people, and a rabbit not unlike the one you'd cuddled the day before might pounce on you, only this one would be 15 feet tall, and as disproportionately violent as it was large. No human was known to have escaped the 60-foot leaps those monstrous rabbits could take. After pressing ahead for nearly 10 minutes, Wesley halted. And Meg knew why. The wind had shifted. It blew at them now, carrying the scent of blood. The stench was so thick, Wesley and Meg began coughing in unison. "We're close." Wesley gave the air a sniff, slowly testing for the direction the scent of blood was coming from. "That way," Meg said, stepping off the path and dashing off at an angle. Wesley hastened after her, and after running about 30 yards, he stopped. Meg was standing there. The deputy's heart was pounding madly, not just because he'd been running full tilt, but because of the scene that lay before him. About 30 feet off the ground, a gigantic white spiderweb was strung between the trees. Glittering in the dappled sunlight, it could even be described as beautiful, if not for the pair of corpses that lay beneath the web. "Pa!" Wesley ran straight for them because, even though one of the bodies was weirdly twisted, it was still his father. As natural as that was for him, Meg remained rooted because the other remains, more horrible than the sheriff's in some ways, still had a kind of beauty to them. In a manner of speaking, the corpse was a double-edged blade. The giant spider was purple with crimson spots, and its 7-foot-long body had been split in two right through its stucky abdomen. The slice through it was exquisite. As she was looking at the spider, Meg couldn't tell whether she was frightened by its brutalized remains or mesmerized by the perfectly beautiful slice through it. Clinging to his father's corpse, Wesley sounded a million miles away as he called out his name. "Hell of a thing, isn't it?" Cowboys said in a voice that called to mind iron. "Cutting a monster like this in two with a sword. Who in the hell?" Meg was just about to reply in a frightened tone that she knew who'd done it. Only one gorgeous man could have cut down this monster with such grace and beauty. The girl nodded. The figure in black she'd glimpsed on the cliff over the village wavered seductively behind her shut eyelids. neither giving nor receiving a single ray of light. He was exquisite. What about his father? Cowboy's query brought Meg back. She looked over at Wesley. The sheriff's body lay on the ground, and Wesley was praying beside it. He had both hands clenched tightly, and they trembled ever so slightly. Was that from anger or grief? Actually, it was both. He's dead. That was all she said. Now back to her senses, Meg let out a deep breath, but no tears fell. We've confirmed the worst. Let's go, Wesley said, standing up. But your father? We've got to bury him, said the girl. I wish like hell we could, but it'll have to wait till later. The job comes first. He's got what it takes, Meg thought. Not at all what he was like earlier. Was he this driven by duty before? Wesley looked over at Cowboy and repeated, Let's go. Not yet. Meg said. And just then, there was the crack of gunfire. Cowboy had discharged his rifle. But when had he managed it? A split second earlier, the weapon had still been hanging on his back, and he'd shown no sign of bracing for action. Pa? Wesley cried out. Bullets had pierced the sheriff's heart and forehead. The shots had come with such speed they seemed simultaneous. What the hell do you think you're doing? An electric jolt of fury made Wesley's right hand jump to the pistol on his hip and stop. The smoking barrel of the rifle was pointed right between his eyes. Simmer down. Sorry, but I had to deal with this my own way. See, out in the western frontier, I've seen other kinds of living dead besides nobles. And those ones you've got to plug through the head to kill. Then why didn't you say so? And why through the heart, too? The tickers, just to be sure. And if I'd asked you beforehand, would you have given me the okay? Meg touched a soothing hand to Wesley's right arm, though she didn't actually come out and say it. That was her way of telling him Cowboy was right. Wesley let the strength drain from his body. His hand pulled away from his pistol. Relief spread across his face, but it immediately pulled tight again. Cowboy hadn't lowered his rifle, and murderous intent emanated from every inch of him. The two young people stood there unable to do anything, and a second later their eyes got a fiery shot. Unlike a pistol, this had a roar like a rumbling in the earth, and it shook the stand of trees. Meg and Wesley only turned to look because the anguished cries of a beast had risen behind them. A black form was in the process of lying down in the midst of flying gore. Even before the realization that there'd been a vicious beast coming up behind them could flash through the pair's minds, and there was once again a burst of flame and a thunderous roar that shook them both. Straightening up from the hunched positions they'd taken, they turned their eyes in the direction the shot had gone. Quiet had returned to the stand of trees, as if there hadn't been any shooting at all just now. In a thicket about 30 feet ahead of them, a blood-stained gray body writhed weakly. But that wasn't what held the trio's attention. That second shot, what did you see? Wesley asked, his query sounding oddly shaken. He was staring at Cowboy's face. A person, one dressed in black. The tough's voice sounded terribly hollow. Before Meg could ask him about something, he said something else. It was the very thing she'd meant to ask. Only, maybe he wasn't human at all. That was one good-looking man, Second part, and